The origins of NATO's stay-behind networks lie in the turbulent aftermath of World War II and the onset of the Cold War, when tensions between the Western democracies and the Soviet Union escalated into a protracted geopolitical struggle. These networks were conceived as a covert defense mechanism to counter the threat of Soviet invasion and occupation in Western Europe. Analogous to Nazi werewolf operations in which units would be raised to fight behind Allied lines after the fall of the centralized German government, their establishment reflects both the strategic foresight of NATO and its allies and the deep paranoia that characterized the era. The end of World War II saw the division of Europe into Eastern and Western blocs, with the Soviet Union consolidating control over Eastern Europe and NATO emerging in 1949 as a counterbalance to Soviet expansion. The Soviet Union's military strength and ideological commitment to spreading communism presented a direct threat to Western democracies. For NATO, ensuring the resilience of member states in the face of potential occupation became a priority. Western military planners quickly recognized that in the event of a Soviet invasion, many European countries would be quickly overwhelmed by the superior numbers and firepower of the Red Army. In response, NATO adopted the concept of stay-behind networks, clandestine groups of operatives who would remain active within occupied territories. Their mission was to wage guerrilla warfare, gather intelligence, and disrupt enemy operations. The stay-behind strategy drew heavily on the experiences of World War II resistance movements. During the Nazi occupation of Europe, underground networks such as the French Resistance, Polish Home Army, and Italian partisan groups had demonstrated the effectiveness of guerrilla tactics, sabotage, and covert operations. These groups inspired NATO planners to replicate their methods in preparation for a possible Soviet occupation. The United States, as the dominant power within NATO, took the lead in organizing and funding stay-behind operations. The Central Intelligence Agency and the United Kingdom's Secret Intelligence Service collaborated with European intelligence agencies to establish these networks. In Italy, the operation was codenamed Gladio, and similar structures were developed across Western Europe, including in France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, Norway, Denmark, and Greece. Each country's network operated semi-independently, with coordination provided by NATO's Allied Clandestine Committee and the Clandestine Planning Committee. These bodies ensured that the networks adhered to a common strategic framework while allowing for flexibility based on national circumstances. To prepare operatives for their missions, NATO and allied intelligence agencies established rigorous training programs. Recruits, often drawn from former resistance fighters, military personnel, and trusted civilians, were trained in sabotage, communications, reconnaissance, and survival skills. Training camps were set up in remote locations, and participants were drilled in guerrilla tactics and the use of specialized equipment. In addition to training personnel, the networks created extensive infrastructure to support their operations. Weapons caches, explosives, and radio equipment were hidden in secret locations, often in remote forests, caves, or private properties. These stockpiles were intended to provide operatives with the resources needed to sustain prolonged resistance efforts. The existence of the stay-behind networks was shrouded in secrecy. Only a select few individuals within each country's government and intelligence services were aware of their activities. This secrecy was deemed essential to protect the networks from potential infiltration by Soviet spies and to ensure their operational readiness in the event of war. However, this secrecy also created significant political and ethical challenges. In some cases, the networks operated without the explicit approval or oversight of the national government, raising questions about the accountability and the potential misuse of power. These concerns would come to the forefront in later decades as the network's activities became the subject of public scrutiny and controversy. The stay-behind networks were part of a broader strategy of containment. Beyond preparing for a Soviet invasion, they also served to reinforce NATO's unity by ensuring that Western Europe remained a bulwark against communist influence. These networks extended into key strategic locations, including Turkey, where the country's position at the intersection of Europe and Asia made it vital for countering Soviet advances in the Mediterranean and Middle East. In some instances, stay-behind networks work closely with local anti-communist movements. For example, in Italy and Greece, these networks fostered connections with right-wing organizations that shared their objective of countering Soviet influence. While this collaboration strengthened the network's capabilities, it also introduced controversial dynamics, as these alliances often involve groups with authoritarian tendencies. The operational aspects of NATO's stay-behind networks reveal a complex web of clandestine activities designed to ensure the resilience of Western Europe in the face of Soviet aggression. While their primary mission was to prepare for and respond to a Soviet occupation, these networks also became embroiled in domestic political struggles and covert operations that extended beyond their original mandate. The core mission of the stay-behind networks was to organize and execute guerrilla warfare in the event of a Soviet invasion. This involved three key components. 1. Sabotage. Operatives were trained to disrupt enemy supply lines, communication networks, and critical infrastructure. Targets included railways, bridges, power plants, and military installations. By crippling logistical and operational capabilities, the networks aimed to weaken the Soviet forces and slow their advance. 2. Intelligence gathering. Stay-behind operatives were equipped with radio transmitters and other communication tools to relay intelligence to NATO headquarters. This included information on Soviet troop movements, logistical operations, and local conditions within occupied territories. 3. Support for Allied occupations. In addition to their independent activities, the networks were designed to coordinate with NATO forces in the event of a counteroffensive. Their knowledge of local terrain and conditions would be invaluable in guiding Allied troops and facilitating operations behind enemy lines. The operational tactics employed by stay-behind networks were sophisticated and drew heavily on lessons learned from previous wartime resistance efforts. Training camps equipped operatives with the skills needed to operate independently in hostile environments. This included instruction in demolitions, use of explosives, and disruption of transportation networks, training in evasion, camouflage, and self-sufficiency to operate under occupation, use of secure radios and ciphers to relay messages without detection, and methods to influence public opinion and undermine enemy morale. Despite their extensive preparation, the stay-behind networks faced significant challenges. Maintaining secrecy was paramount, but this often led to operational inefficiencies and lack of coordination. Moreover, the network's involvement in domestic politics blurred the line between legitimate defense measures and unlawful interference, raising ethical questions that continue to spark debate. Stay-behind networks were structured as decentralized cells to minimize the risk of exposure and ensure operational security. This structure mirrored the compartmentalized approach used by World War II resistance movements, reducing the likelihood that captured operatives could compromise the entire organization. While their primary mission was to counter a Soviet invasion, some stay-behind networks became involved in domestic political struggles during the Cold War. These activities often reflected the broader ideological conflict between Western democracies and communist movements. In Italy, the Italian stay-behind network, known as Gladio, became the focus of intense controversy due to allegations that it was involved in domestic terrorism during Italy's Years of Lead. This period, characterized by political violence and unrest, saw numerous bombings, assassinations, and acts of sabotage. Critics accused Gladio operatives of carrying out false flag attacks to discredit leftist groups and shift public opinion toward more conservative policies. In Belgium, stay-behind operatives were implicated in a series of violent robberies and attacks known as the Brabant killings. These incidents, which targeted civilians, fueled speculation that elements within the network were attempting to create a climate of fear and justify authoritarian measures. In Greece, the stay-behind network was linked to efforts to suppress communist influence and support right-wing governments. These activities contributed to the broader context of political instability and repression during the Cold War. The legacy of NATO's stay-behind networks is a complex and contested one, marked by both their contributions to Cold War defense strategies and the controversies that emerged from their activities. As the Cold War came to an end and the existence of these networks was revealed to the public, they became the subject of intense debate and investigation. The existence of the stay-behind networks remained a closely guarded secret until the early 1990s, when revelations about Operation Gladio in Italy brought them to public attention. Italian Prime Minister Giulio Andreotti's admission of Gladio's existence in 1990 sparked widespread media coverage and political fallout, leading to similar disclosures in other European countries. While some viewed the networks as a necessary and pragmatic response to the Soviet threat, others criticized their secrecy and the lack of accountability. Allegations of involvement in domestic terrorism and political manipulation further fueled public skepticism and distrust. In several countries, investigations were launched to determine the scope and activities of stay-behind networks. Parliamentary inquiries and judicial proceedings sought to uncover the extent of NATO's involvement and the network's potential misuse. The controversies surrounding stay-behind networks highlight the ethical dilemmas of covert operations in democratic societies. While these networks were designed to protect against external threats, their secretive nature and alleged interference in domestic politics raises questions about accountability and the balance between security and civil liberties. The lack of transparency in the network's operations undermined public trust and raised concerns about unchecked power within the intelligence agencies. Allegations of manipulation and involvement in acts of terrorism to discredit political opponents suggest a troubling willingness to subvert democratic principles in the name of security. The operational structure and tactics of stay-behind networks have had a lasting impact on modern intelligence and counterinsurgency practices. Their use of decentralized cells, secure communication, and guerrilla tactics continues to inform contemporary strategies in unconventional warfare and counterterrorism. However, the controversies surrounding their activities serve as a cautionary tale about the potential risks and ethical challenges of covert operations. The stay-behind networks represent a paradox in Cold War history. While they were a testament to NATO's commitment to defending Western Europe, their secretive operations and alleged abuses have left a complex and often troubling legacy. The debates surrounding their activities underscore the enduring tension between security and democracy in the context of global conflict. Raising questions about raising questions about accountability and the raising questions about the accountability raising questions about the accountability and the raising questions about the accountability